My name is Elizabeth Harrow. I'm 63 years old, recently widowed. And up until a few months ago, I would have told you my greatest accomplishment was raising two children who turned out better than I ever dreamed. Tonight, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, zipping up the same deep plum dress I wore to my daughter Claire's college graduation. She'd called me that afternoon, said she wanted to talk things through over dinner. Her voice had softened warmer than it had been in weeks. She even laughed, lightly, when she said the place she'd chosen was Le Jardin, that little French restaurant on Maple Avenue, the same place her father and I used to celebrate our anniversaries. She said she missed me, that she'd been thinking about everything since our fight about the wedding budget. And foolishly, maybe selfishly, I let myself believe she meant it. The last time we spoke, Claire had called me controlling and unsupportive for refusing to pay $70,000 toward her wedding. I'd offered $15,000 enough for a lovely ceremony at the community church, but that wasn't enough for her. Not for the kind of wedding Ethan, her fiancé, had in mind. Tonight, though, she sounded different. Maybe the pregnancy was humbling her, I thought. Maybe carrying her first child had opened up a softer part of her. So I put on lipstick, touched up the grays around my temples, slipped on the silver bracelet Claire gave me when she landed her first job in Manhattan, back when she still called just to hear my voice. And yet, as I locked the front door behind me, something tugged at my ribs, a hollowness. I couldn't name it then, but I've learned to trust those quiet instincts, the ones that hum like distant thunder just before a storm. I didn't know it yet, but this dinner wasn't meant to heal anything. It was a setup. And by the time dessert was offered, my daughter, the same child who once snuck wildflowers into my handbag on Mother's Day, would sit across from me, stone-faced, as three lawyers handed me papers that could have erased everything I had left. If I had signed them, but I didn't. And what happened next changed everything. Le Jardin hadn't changed. The brick facade still glowed under the evening lights, and inside, the same candlelit tables and soft violin music gave it that elegant hush Claire used to love. I remember thinking, maybe this was her way of extending an olive branch, choosing a place that held meaning for us both. She was already seated when I arrived, tucked into a corner booth beneath a wall of ivy and framed Parisian prints. Her dress was tasteful but expensive, and she rested one hand lightly on her barely showing belly, the other wrapped around a water glass she barely touched. "Mom," she said, standing to greet me. She kissed my cheek, and I breathed in the same vanilla perfume I used to find on her pillowcases back when she still lived at home. "You look lovely," I said, smoothing the front of my dress as I sat down. "Is Ethan joining us?" Claire smiled. It didn't quite reach her eyes. "In just a minute. He had a work call to finish." We talked light things. How I was settling into the smaller house. Whether I'd tried that new bakery near the farmer's market. It felt rehearsed. Safe. And with every minute, that knot in my stomach pulled tighter. Then Ethan arrived. Not alone. He stepped in wearing that tailored navy suit he saves for meetings he wants to dominate. Behind him trailed three men in dark jackets, all carrying slim briefcases. One of them nodded politely to the hostess as they followed Ethan to our table. Claire stood, gestured at the booth like a stage assistant setting the scene. "Mom, these are some of Ethan's colleagues." I blinked. Colleagues? The men's Saturday, the booth suddenly felt too small, too quiet. And that's when I knew. This wasn't dinner. This was a negotiation. Only I hadn't brought my side of the table. The man seated across from me had silver hair and the kind of polished smile that lawyers wear like cufflinks. He introduced himself as Martin Keene, a longtime associate of Ethan's, though the papers he pulled from his briefcase suggested something far more personal. "We're here," he said smoothly, "to present an opportunity, something we think is in everyone's best interest, especially yours, Mrs. Harrow." I glanced at Claire. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her fingers tightened around her water glass like it might anchor her to the moment. Ethan leaned forward, flashing his easy, rehearsed charm. "Elizabeth, this is just a way to simplify things. You're on your own now, and managing property, investments, accounts, that's a lot. We can help take that weight off your shoulders. He slid the folder toward me. Claire still wouldn't look up. My throat tightened. And if I don't sign? Claire's voice came soft, but the edge was there, cold, clinical. Then we'll need to revisit your role in our child's life. We've spoken with a family law specialist. Grandparent rights? They're not guaranteed in this state, especially if there's a pattern of hostility. I stared at her, this woman I had carried for 9 months, taught to ride a bike, packed lunches for, defended from cruel middle school girls, cried with after her first heartbreak. She was looking through me like I was a business hurdle, not a mother. Ethan gestured to the papers again. You'll still have access, of course, but we'd manage the day-to-day. Make sure your assets are protected. Everyone wins. Martin Keene nodded, as if that sealed it. I didn't touch the folder. My hands remained folded on my lap. Calm, cold. You brought lawyers to a dinner invitation, I said, meeting Ethan's eyes directly. Interesting strategy. His smile faltered for just a moment. Claire finally whispered, Mom, just read it. I did something else instead. I reached slowly into my purse, and I pulled out my phone. I scrolled until I found the name. Lucas. My thumb hovered for only a breath before I tapped call. The line rang once, then twice. Mom? His voice was like a lighthouse, through fog, steady, warm, certain. Lucas, I said calmly, though the air around me had turned razor thin. I need you to come to Le Jardin now. He hesitated. Is everything okay? Number. But it will be once you're here. I need you to bring your eyes. The ones you use at work. Lucas is an emergency physician. He's trained to recognize signs of trauma, to assess what's real, what's dangerous, and what's being hidden behind polite faces and pressed suits. He doesn't panic. He notices everything. Give me 20 minutes, he said. I'm coming. I ended the call, placed the phone face down next to the untouched folder. The silence at the table had turned dense. Claire finally looked up, her brows tight. There's no reason to drag Lucas into this. I disagree, I said. When someone tries to change the terms of my life behind a candlelit dinner, I prefer at least one witness who isn't being paid to smile. Martin shifted uncomfortably. The youngest of the lawyers, probably still new to this kind of theater, reached for his water glass like it might offer guidance. Ethan, still clinging to his role as ringmaster, tried to recover. We're trying to help you, Elizabeth. This isn't an ambush. I looked at my daughter. Is that what you call this? Help? Claire didn't answer. She just folded her hands and stared at the napkin in her lap. I checked my watch. If traffic cooperated, Lucas would arrive in 17 minutes. And for the first time since I'd sat down, I felt the tiniest shift in gravity. I wasn't alone anymore. He walked in like he'd just left surgery, which, knowing my son, he probably had. The sleeves of his scrubs were pushed up, his hair still damp at the edges. He scanned the restaurant once, found me, and made his way across the floor with the kind of quiet authority that turns heads without asking to. Mom, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder, then glancing around the table. What's going on? This? I said simply, nudging the manila folder toward him. They'd like me to sign it. Lucas flipped it open, read silently for half a minute, then looked up at Ethan. Power of attorney? Just to help her manage things, Ethan offered quickly. She's been under a lot of stress, and we thought... Lucas raised a hand, cutting him off. Mom, did you ask for this? Number. Do you feel confused about your finances? Unsafe? Pressured? I smiled tightly. This morning I disputed a utility overcharge and renegotiated my car insurance policy. So no, I'm perfectly competent. Claire shifted in her seat. Her voice was quiet but firm. We're trying to make sure everything is secure for the baby. We want to avoid chaos down the line. Lucas turned to her. Then maybe don't bring 3 lawyers to ambush our mother. Martin cleared his throat. Dr. Harrow, perhaps this isn't the time. Lucas leaned in slightly, his tone clinical. I'm sorry. Are you a geriatric psychiatrist? No. Then let's not diagnose my mother with incompetence at a dinner table. I caught the moment Ethan realized things weren't going according to plan. His jaw twitched. His hand, resting on the table, curled into a subtle fist. Lucas slid the folder back toward me. Don't sign anything tonight, Mom. I'd like you to take legal advice of your own before making any decisions. I met his eyes and nodded. Ethan tried to smile. We're all family here. No, Lucas said. Family doesn't hand you a pen and a threat in the same breath. 12 minutes after Lucas sat down, the front door of Le Jardin opened again. Louisa Callahan didn't dress like a bulldog in a courtroom. She didn't need to. Her soft gray suit and simple leather tote said one thing. She knew exactly what room she was walking into and how to dismantle it. Elizabeth? She greeted, placing a hand on my shoulder with the warmth of a friend, but the precision of someone who'd done this before. Sorry to crash dinner, but I brought the documents we discussed. Ethan's face turned the color of day-old coffee. Martin sat straighter. The youngest lawyer looked ready to slide under the table. Claire blinked. Who is this? This, I said calmly, is my attorney. Louisa placed a thick folder next to the one Ethan had brought. We've already handled the asset protection side of things. 2 weeks ago, in fact. Everything Elizabeth owns, her house, her savings, her retirement portfolio is now secured under the Harrow Family Trust. Lucas raised an eyebrow. I assume I'm trustee? Louisa smiled. You and one independent co-trustee. Equal decision-making authority. Martin leaned forward, trying to regain control. This is highly irregular. It's our understanding that Mrs. Harrow was considering a... What you understood, Louisa interrupted, was based on assumptions, and possibly a civil violation, depending on who's been snooping around her medical privacy. She turned to Ethan. I'd suggest you advise your counsel about the legal implications of attempting to construct an incompetency narrative for financial gain. That's elder abuse in most states. Claire finally spoke. We just wanted to make sure our child had a secure future. And she will, I said, because her grandmother knows the difference between legacy and leverage. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, then looked to Martin, who had already begun collecting his papers. Louisa leaned in slightly. I suggest you leave now, before we decide this is more than just a dinner with poor intentions. And one by one they stood and left. As their footsteps faded down the tiled hallway, I opened my purse once more. I almost forgot, I said lightly, pulling out a smaller envelope, this one labeled and sealed. Louisa raised an eyebrow. This, the packet you mentioned? I nodded and spread the contents on the table like playing cards, photographs blurry but clear enough of Ethan pacing outside my house at dusk. Email printouts between him and a private investigator asking about my banking history, medical appointments, even my driving habits. A copy of the inquiry made to my neighbor pretending to be from the State Health Board. Lucas stared at the papers, then at Claire. You were going to have her declared mentally unfit? Claire's voice came barely above a whisper. I didn't know about all of it. Ethan said we needed to be prepared. Prepared for what? I asked. My death? Or the inconvenience of my independence? Martin Keene had been halfway to the exit, but paused, clearly reevaluating his role in the evening charade. Mr. Keene, Louisa said coolly, you may want to consider whether continuing to represent Mr. Moore exposes you to liability. If you were aware of these documents, we may be talking about conspiracy to defraud. He didn't respond, just turned and walked faster. Claire slumped in her chair, eyes fixed on the table. I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough that only she could hear me. I'm not cutting you off, Claire, but I am cutting off the pipeline you thought I would be. If you want a relationship with me, with your child, it won't be bought, and it certainly won't be coerced. She nodded once, slowly. But I could see it now, the fracture. Not fresh and shocking anymore, but a quiet, settled crack in the foundation of who we used to be. And from that moment on, I stopped trying to seal it. 3 weeks later, I stood at my kitchen counter, pouring coffee for 2. The mornings had grown quieter, but not in a lonely way. More like intentional, peaceful. After decades of chasing everyone else's needs, school drop-offs, late-night laundry, emergency birthday cakes, I was finally listening for my own. Janine, my new neighbor, let herself in with a knock that was more ritual than necessity. She carried a casserole dish wrapped in a striped towel and a knowing grin. "I brought the cornbread," she said, setting it down. "And I ran into someone you know." I raised an eyebrow. "Ethan," she said, pouring herself a mug. "At the bank, causing quite the scene. Apparently, a few of his accounts got flagged for irregular activity." I didn't flinch, just stirred my coffee. "Karma doesn't knock. It swings the door open." Janine laughed. "You've got a wicked calm about you these days." "It's clarity," I said. "Feels new." After Franco's, everything had shifted. I filed formal complaints. Louisa sent a letter so direct that Ethan's firm backed away from him within a week. Claire didn't call. Not then. And I didn't chase her. Instead, I turned towards something else. A few days after the dinner, Louisa had introduced me to the director of a local support group, women like me, targeted by their own families for financial control. Some had lost everything. Others, like me, had caught the wave before it crashed. They called it Silver Strong. I started showing up on Tuesday nights. Quietly, at first. Listening. Learning. But it didn't take long before someone said, "You should lead one of these." Now, I did. Once a week, I sat in a circle of folding chairs beside women with stories etched in their voices. We talked about manipulation, about setting boundaries that actually held, about love that had grown toxic and how to grieve people who weren't dead, just no longer kind. We called it reclaiming. I called it breathing again. The text came from Lucas just before noon on a Thursday. "She had the baby. 7 pounds, even. Everyone's healthy. Her name is Eleanor." My mother's name. I stared at the screen, the letters swimming slightly, not from tears, but from the quiet weight of recognition. Naming the baby after my mother wasn't a coincidence. It was a message, a tug on an old cord. Claire always knew how to dress control in sentiment. Janine noticed the change in my face as I set the phone down. "She's reeling you in," she said softly. "I know. She's using the baby. I know that too." For a moment, I pictured the infant wrinkled and red, tucked in a hospital blanket with her tiny fist curled near her cheek. An innocent, unaware of the strategies swirling above her crib. Later that evening, the call came not from Claire, but from Lucas. "She wants you to come visit," he said. "She made it clear you'd be welcome, if you're open to talking." "About the baby?" He paused. "About the trust. Again." I closed my eyes, let my breath settle. "She's not ready," I said. "No," he agreed. "But she wants something, and she thinks the baby gives her leverage." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't been able to say aloud yet. I wanted to meet my granddaughter, truly. But not if it meant reopening the wounds Claire still refused to acknowledge. Not if it meant pretending the last betrayal never happened. Not if it required sacrificing the peace I had bled for. "I'll write to her," I said finally. Not a fight, not a plea, just terms. Lucas sighed. Part relief, part resignation. She may not accept them. Then she's not ready. And neither was I for manipulation in the shape of a lullaby. I wrote it the next morning, sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee growing cold beside me. No theatrics. No accusations. Just truth, pressed into paper. "Claire, I would like to meet Eleanor. I want to know her laugh, her favorite books, the shape of her hands when she sleeps. I want to give her the kind of love that doesn't come with a price tag or a contract. But I need you to understand something very clearly. My boundaries are not punishment. They are protection of myself and of what I've built. If you want me in your daughter's life, there will be no more discussions about the trust, my finances, or attempts to rewrite the past. Visits will happen in Lucas's presence, and the moment manipulation enters the room, I will leave. Not because I don't love you, but because I finally love myself enough to stop being the open vault you assumed I'd always be. You are still my daughter. I hope, in time, you'll also be my friend again. But until then, I will be Eleanor's grandmother only if I can do it with dignity and clarity. With hope and boundaries. Mom, I sealed the envelope before I could soften the edges. Then I walked it to the mailbox, alone, the morning sun catching on the gardenias I'd planted last spring. New roots, strong ones. 3 days passed. Then a week? No reply. But something inside me had already shifted. This wasn't silence like before. It wasn't that raw, aching absence of being discarded. It was stillness. A choice I'd made to step out of a cycle that had spun too long on guilt and fear. Eleanor may come find me one day. If she does, she will meet a woman who chose peace over pleading. A woman who teaches with presence, not pressure. A woman who can no longer be moved. And that will be the legacy I leave behind.